Hello and welcome to Radical Acts of Creative Ageing. My name's Farrell Ronalden and I'm the Director of CADA, Creative Ageing Development and Agency. The dictionary defines the term radical as fundamental, to root out, and we want to explore what this could mean for the future of creative ageing. We are inviting a number of creatives to offer their reflections on what radical creative ageing means to them. Today we speak to Dominic Campbell. Hello.
Hello.
Dominic is the co-leader of Creative Ageing International, using celebration as a strategy for transformational change globally. With vast experience as an artistic director, curator, and producer, he has organised numerous innovative and high-profile events. Notably, he directed the growth and expansion of Ireland's Bealtaine Festival over 8 years. Dominic has also mentored festivals in Wales and Scotland and collaborated on projects with partners in Australia and the Netherlands. In 2012, he founded the first global conference on creativity in older age, which was inaugurated by Irish President Michael D. Higgins. In 2016, Dominic became an inaugural Atlantic Fellow for Equity in Brain Health at the Global Brain Health Institute, an ambitious worldwide program aimed at finding social and public health solutions to reduce the scale and adverse impact of dementia, jointly run by Trinity College Dublin and University College San Francisco. Recognised as a leader in the cultural response to social and healthcare changes resulting from an ageing population, Dominic has consistently demonstrated original thinking and a track record of delivering unique activity and cultural change. Wow. So there's quite a few inaugurals in there. So you're doing lots of things kind of challenging and doing things for the first time. So, Dominic, my first question I will ask you is, what first motivated you to have a creative career, and has this motivation changed over time?
What first motivated a creative career and has it changed over time? I think what first motivated a creative career, I'm not sure there was an option. It's making stuff, and particularly making stuff with groups of people, is how I make sense of the world. It's how I make sense of living. And it always has been that, really. I can't think when it wasn't. I can think when I tried to make things on my own, which I can do, but actually I much prefer making things in relationship to other people. It's really fun listening to you read out the biography, and it kind of makes me laugh a bit now, but it's because I just made stuff and then kept going, and I was lucky and stubborn, I guess, to keep doing things that were interesting to me. And then in retrospect, you look back and you have a consistent record, and it makes it easier when you're knocking on doors trying to get people to get involved in some idea that you've got, or you can point to things that you've done previously. And so in some ways that's the big change. The big change is I can point back to things and say, look, I did that thing, it worked. This, in other ways it hasn't changed at all, because I'm still trying to make sense. And I guess the issues and things have changed. If I think right back to when I started working with the idea of old, I suppose, then that's quite a while ago. I was thinking when I was prepping for this when that was, and it is about, I get my decade on now. It was about 1997, round about then. And there were two main reasons. One was because I worked with carnivalists and people that made fireworks displays, and people that worked in community arts or participatory arts or whatever it was called at the time. And I also had an education in the fine arts, and I was really frustrated by this disagreement at the time between supports for those kind of practices, and it felt really, to me at that point, really pointed. And so I fondly imagined that in older age, a lot of those disagreements would disappear. And those disagreements often did things that were really social disagreements. They were about access and involvement and equity and race and culture and class, really. But they were manifest, at least in my world, in terms of arts, and who got support and who didn't, and who seemed to be talked about. And so I fondly imagined that when people got old, whatever old was, that would disappear. Those divisions, people would be less bothered because they have a limited sense of time, and a lot of things that would divisions earlier in your life would kind of disappear. That's what I fondly imagined at the beginning. And as we both now, how we laugh, the naivety of me in my whatever that was 30s, because obviously that's not the case. People get old at different points. They get old for different reasons. Old is as much a condition of the body and a condition that's caused by the social impacts of health and the way that you live your life and where you live it, as it is an attitude, as it is a social agreement, I suppose. And so what's happened over time is that my understanding has changed, my articulacy has changed, the words I would use to describe what it is that we're doing and why, and the world around it has changed. So there, I mean, since we started talking, which is now maybe a decade, there have been some really significant shifts that I think are changing whatever creative aging is. But they're changing the society that we work in. So again, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, this week, Diana Ross, who is 79, I think, became the face of Saint Laurent. Like, that was unbelievable that somebody in their late 70s would become the face of a high-end fashion brand 20 years ago. The amount of people that are touring in rock bands in their 70s and 80s now, that's way past what we ever thought would happen. So there are significant changes in culture which are primarily driven, I think, by economy, really. They're driven by people. If you can buy it, you will change what is being provided. Literally, it's a financial kind of motivation. So that part of the culture is changing. There are other things that really are, the wicked and sticky problem side of the house that are less changeable, or at least seem less changeable. But we can unpack that as I go. Does that start to answer your question, Val?
It does, and it's interesting. It's interesting because I hadn't even thought. We have been talking to each other for about a decade, and it is that long. And when I first started, the concept creative aging didn't exist. I'm guessing it didn't exist for you either. And just the kind of the complexity of the questions that we're exploring around intersectionality and, all of that kind of, as you say, sort of wicked, sticky, messy, whatever you want to call it. It's complex. And it feels like the more you learn, the more you delve, the more complex it gets, not less.
I think it's where the radical bit exists.
Yes.
Increasingly, I think this is where the radical potential of old age lies, and I'm delighted to have an opportunity to talk about it, and also just to work out what it is. Like I said at the beginning, I work things out by making things with people. So, at the moment, one of the things I'm fascinated by is what happens to creativity when you have a sense that you are time limited. So does that make up, it seems to make living in the moment more important. It seems to make, it does make some of the peripheral stuff disappear. I can feel it in my own body. It's 30 years of my own body since I started thinking about old and making things about old. So there is a sense in my own body. There's also there's an attitudinal thing. I can, difficult things are going to happen. So how do I respond to those? But I think there's something really fantastic, really fascinating, really interesting, which is only starting to emerge, which is about, if I know that I'm time limited and I want to make something fundamentally move, and possibly I have cash in the bank, which is quite a big one, then where will I put my time and energy, and what will that look like? So I'm really interested in what the radical manifestation of that is by artists and artist collectives and people in general and communities and activists. as they get to that point in their life, while also looking at things like climate change and, you know, the wicked and sticky problems, the things that don't move, because actually it's a very different, it's not about what you will build, it's about what you will leave. It becomes about legacy. And for me, I think that's the next really interesting bit, and I can see the beginnings of it, I think, in small places.
So interesting. Just making me think about many moons ago, I did some work with Rosetta Life and supported them to work with end of life, to attract creatives to support people who were entering end of life, you know, that kind of area. And what challenged me at that moment was lots of people applied for the position, but the person who got it was their art form was drama. And until I had met somebody who was a drama practitioner who specialized in end of life, I didn't even know it could exist, like how the concept, just even challenging for me as someone who's trying to be sort of open-minded and thinking about things differently. But it works. It's incredible. So anyway, I should park that there. And ask my next
I love the tangents. You see, the tangents are really important. The side streams are really where the interesting stuff is. And if we're going to talk about radical acts of creative aging, then we need to just pay attention. So the fact that you talk about end of life, I think it's important that we don't ignore the fact that it's there. Okay, there is old, which is one thing. There is end of life, which is a different thing. There is knowing that you're end of life, it's another thing. There is what I started writing about as whoops elephant. You know, all of a sudden, whoops elephant, we've discovered that this thing has happened. So one of the things that happened to me during the pandemic, while lockdown, at this very table, was I started working for the Irish Hospice Foundation, and I did it because somebody asked me to. They'd always done things with the arts. They wanted to do intentional things with the arts. The opportunity came along. And I very deliberately said, that's not my creative aging work. It's a very separate thing. And I've kept them very separate so far. But I've learned an awful lot from the process of setting up what is now a national program in Ireland, working in hospitals and hospices and with community, and now training artists and looking at what an artist does, what a creative therapist can do, what a clinical psychiatrist and psychologist can do, how that fits into something like an aging, into a bereavement pyramid. And from that, I've started to reverse back into the idea of aging, and to think about how does creative work assist people? How does it come into play at moments when your narrative of your life gets fractured? So we're all trundling along and it's all good, and then I get a terrible diagnosis, or I get the phone call at 3 a.m, or something radical happens and my life story snaps, and then I can sometimes rebuild it or not. So sometimes people talk about that as resilience, sometimes they talk about it as different things, life story. But I've also had the opportunity in the last year, through Creative Brain Week and through other programs, to think about how that works for an individual, for the self, really, for an individual, for a group, and for a society. And that's one of the things that my work is starting to bring in, is can we think about groups of people who might be born into conflict zones or live in conflict zones where snappy lives happen all the time, things come out of the blue, how they use creativity to build back. Quite often we see, you know, amazing creative stuff comes from places which are really difficult, because it's about making sense of the world. And so I'm now starting to see whether I can, how do we join all of that? How do I join all of that together in an interesting way?
It's fascinating. And I could ask you even more questions, Dominic, but I shan't. I shall move on to our second question, which is, do you consciously challenge your own internalized ageism in your creative practice? And what inspires you to do this? If you do.
Yes, I do. I mean, in the work that I do, because I've been doing it for a long time, then it's kind of automatic that I sense check who's involved in a project and how do they get involved, and does this project, is it easy for them to get engaged with it, and what kind of voices are in the room, and all the good stuff. The thing that I've found myself checking more recently is my own ageism about myself.
Yeah.
And so I'm 58. I am carrying a spare tire around my middle that wasn't there 2 years ago. I can physically feel myself changing. And so now I have to work, literally work. I have to do a job of work. I have to go back into exercise and training and functionally work on that. Not in order to be, skipping gaily up the stairs and running through the fields as I could when I was 18, but in order to maintain the bands for 20 years' time. And it's really changed the way I think about what is possible in however much time I have left. And then around me, my circuit of friends are getting sick. They're those, what do they call it? The organ recycle conversations have started, where everybody meets each other and goes, "Well, let me tell you about my knees, my liver, and the organ recycles." I love that. So those have started as regular conversation, and so yeah, my challenge for myself is about my challenge with ageism actually is a physical one about myself. It's about physically how I'm in the world. How do I do that? I look for inspirational other. Really, I'm really lucky in that I'm now, one of the great joys of being this age is that I've been having long conversations with other artists and producers and makers for a long period of time, and so we have a repertoire of conversation that we pick up on, and those conversations got really rich. And there are people that are 10, 15, what am I, 58, 57, yeah, 88, 30 years ahead of me. And I really value those. My place in those cycles has really changed, and that's fantastic.
Mhm. I did, it just reminded me of, I did some training, must have been about 5 years ago, which was around sort of, I guess, anti-ageism, but like really centering it in yourself first before looking at kind of others. And one of the things that was the challenge was to ask yourself, what would 40-year-old Farrell say thank you to a 30-year-old Farrell for doing today? So when I'm 60, what will I say thank you to my 30-year-old self for doing? And sort of start there and stop thinking about, cosmetically about physical activity or looking after your mental health or getting a good night's sleep, but start thinking about it as your future self saying thank you to your younger self for doing those things. And it's been quite, so I recently joined the gym, and that's the reason why. Not because I want to look better for this summer, which would be quite nice if I did, but because I think when I'm 50 or when I'm 60, my 60-year-old self will say thank you to me for starting this habit now. And I think that has been a gift that I've been given from working in this sector, is that kind of thinking about the life course, thinking about in the future, not fearing it, but knowing full well that decisions I make today will have a positive or a negative impact then.
And I think that really talks to the creative potential of older age, because if you think about it, if you think about the kind of creative work that you do with the same lens, there was a fantastic piece of work happened in Scotland maybe 15 years ago, where a group of artists around the Scottish Sculpture Factory started thinking about how do they make a piece of work where the impact of that work will happen when they are dead. Okay, so they were thinking in long-term cycles, and it led to some really lovely ways of playing around with, there was somebody did a residency that instead of doing 6 months, they did a day, a week over a much longer period of time. They were thinking really about paying it forward, and so I think that's just so rich. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not about making the work for now, it's about making it for a good time. And it's so important because we live in a world that has such short cycles, 15-minute attention span, 24-hour news cycle, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 for a corporate, a 5-year political life maximum, if you're lucky, and nothing much longer than that. Whereas we're living in a planet which has, where the impact of us on much longer cycles has become really significant. So unless as creative people we can find new ways of thinking about time, thinking about our place within time, thinking about our footprints, then I think we end up repeating the same mistakes, we end up repeating the same work. We don't actually, not necessarily evolve in a linear line, but we don't enrich and deepen the work that we do. And then the other thing to add into it is I am blessed by the fact that I ended up in a university when I was around 55 with the Global Brain Health Institute. And that because of that, I get to work regularly every day with people who are living in different parts of the world, in very different circumstances, in very different healthcare systems, from very different cultures, and who think about time in a different kind of way, where age might be. I'm 58. If I fly to South Africa, I am an old man at 55. I'm a very old man, actually, in bits of South Africa. So that global perspective, combined with the blessings of longevity, combined with the fact that in this society, at least, I might have another good 20 or 30 years, means that I can make a different kind of work, which is informed by all of that. And while also, everything eventually is local. Like, all change is local, all activity is local. So how do we work with a sense of the world that we're living in, a sense of the finite time of our lives within the environments that we're in, and can we go back and forth across borders? It's great. It's worth getting out of bed for.
Definitely, my mind is beginning to be blown. I'm starting to think, which is where the next question very neatly comes on. So, what does radical creative aging mean to you? I mean, that's starting to get there. Is around this local, global time. Yeah, what does it mean to you?
So I think it is about authentic engagement with limited time. Okay, that's probably the starting point. It's about recognizing that you are organic, you are finite, you have a consciousness, you exist in a particular place in a particular time. And I think that's kind of where it starts, really. First bit, because I am a producer, facilitator, collaborator, then I always think about making with rather than much more making with than making by or making for kind of spectrum. And so for me, radical creative aging is about that authenticity of recognizing where you are, the time that you're in, and then the radical bit is the really fun bit. I used to think radical, was I don't know, piercings and tattoos, and now that's really kind of normal. But it's kind of stuck as a kind of style that radical looks like this. You go to Haight-Ashbury or you go to, I don't know, East London, and it looks the same. Radical looks the same, and I'm beginning to think radical is might look like grey hair and soft shoes, comfortable trousers, but a really interesting mind. So I hope that what we can do is allow radical to look different and make it normal. Eventually all radical becomes normal. If it's any good, it kind of seeds into the culture like a virus, and then things change. That's the point of it. It's an active process. But at the moment, for me, yeah, radical should look different. Shouldn't look like it looked before, and it should make your heart beat faster.
Oh, I like that. And I think from what I completely share that view. When I've been talking about CADA taking radical approaches, I think the first thing that people kind of jump to is some sort of out there, aggressive, confrontational. But I'm not sure that that's what radical needs to be. I think
No.
radical is about curiosity and looking and testing in different ways and thinking differently about the world and how it is now and how it could be. It doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be, like you say, comfortable trousers and soft shoes. It doesn't need to be visually disruptive to make a change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, there's a question on the list of questions about if I was to write a manifesto, what would it be? And I mean, my first thought was that I wouldn't write it on my own. I write it with, because that's how I work, but because I think that's because I'm interested in other people. So it's primarily a kind of selfish thing, but also because you know, if I think about, you know, a key radical thing at the moment, it's all about kindness. It's all about compassion for me at the moment. It's about the you know, I sign off on a lot of my emails at the moment as always in kindness, and people think I do it for I don't know what reason. Basically, I do it for me. I do it as a mantra to remind myself that I have no idea what's going on in the heads and lives of people that I'm talking to, whether they're in Dublin or in some other part of the world, whether I've talked to them forever or whether I've just met them. No idea what's going on in their lives. Therefore, always in kindness. And for me, in a world that is increasingly digitally disruptive, where we know that algorithms on social media encourage people to take polarized positions and get grumpy, where we know that those extreme positions, doesn't matter what political foot you're in, just the extremity is the place that's stuck, that doesn't flow, which isn't, you know, rich and growing. Actually, the middle ground is actually which is much more fluid. Then actually acts of radical kindness are the thing that disrupts that. And you know, for the Hospice Foundation, again, I've been growing compassionate communities, so places where we use really simple art making and cups of tea and conversations to make a space where it's okay to talk about difficult things. And we realized that once we started doing that, the hardest thing is walking in the door. The stuff that happens in your head before you go into the door is the most complicated thing. Once you go in, it's like, oh yeah, everybody talks about death and dying, really. It's in our heads. And having a chance to make something is great, because then you don't have to say anything, but you're thinking through your fingers. You're doing all the things that we know creative practices allow you to do. And sometimes you want to make and not say anything, and sometimes you're mad into a conversation, and sometimes the room is alive with something, and sometimes it's just very gentle. And the more you exercise that emotional muscle as a group of people, then things emerge from that, because the way that we are in the small is the way that we come in the big. And those projects, particularly in I've been experimenting with what happens if they're in smaller towns or bigger towns or cities, particularly when they're in smaller towns. They have an effect on what happens with the institutions that are around them. They sort of suck people, because every institution ultimately is like, you know, Eileen and Brian. It's ultimately a person. And so what we're looking at the moment is our radical projects, whether they are celebration and strategy, or whether they are you know, a regular event, or whether they are a training program, that they kind of sit in this middle between community evolution, asset-based community development, and top-down decision making. And somewhere we think these projects that we're doing, that we're currently involved in, sit in the middle. And we were looking at how do you replicate them, how do you scale them? And I've decided that scaling is the wrong language. Scaling is an industrial language. It's about making one thing, and then there's lots of wastage. So actually, organic language is much better. Organic metaphor is much better. We talk about how the projects propagate. And rather than having a manifesto, we've started to have recipes, because you need these ingredients, but you might cook them differently. So with something like Creative Brain Week, which is artists and scientists and people with various conditions and neurodegeneration all getting together in a room and online, it has 3 recipes. It has Nothing About Us Without Us, because everybody gets to talk, and therefore you have to think about how you make a platform for people to talk, and what how that works. It has no show without a tell, no tell without a show, because if neuroscientists will walk along and go, here's my PowerPoint presentation, and nobody gets that other than other neuroscientists, and artists will go, oh, it's all like this, and no neuroscientist ever gets that. For neuroscientists, that sounds like unicorns and rainbows. So no show without a show, no tell without a show recognizes that people have different modes of communication, learning styles, and you need to be able to give people the opportunity in an event to move beyond that. And then the third one is each one teach one, because we don't want to just make an event, we want to actively make change. And so if you start from the perspective that everybody that arrives in the room is a teacher, has something to teach you, and will probably take something away from it, then you're starting to make momentum. People get inspired, they get curious, they get inspired, they get skilled, and then they show it off, and that becomes a dynamic circle. And as maybe Robson came up with first, that model, but I really love that as a model for what is the work, where does the work sit? And I guess it's also, I'm beginning to think in a whole new way at the moment about objects and things, which wasn't in my head. I'm a carnivalist. I made costume. I like performance. I like live. But by the end of the pandemic, at the very end of the pandemic, I ended up making a book, and it all got made like this. Type, sent it off. It came back. An envelope came in. I opened up the thing. I picked up this physical thing in my hand, and it was like, oh, blimey! It's not. What an extraordinary piece of technology a book is. Because firstly, you can't speed read it. You stop and you open up the pages and it's a whole world. Secondly, it's you and the person that wrote it. And thirdly, you've got this thing in your hand which tells you how far you've gone in the story. And then I can take this book, like I can take my spectacle case, and I can give it to you. And if I do that on digital, it makes no sense. But if I stick this in the post and post it to you, and you pick it up and hold it, it has a whole resonance in it. So we're beginning to think that or what we're beginning to play with is around the celebration of strategy, which remains, because if you celebrate what it really does, it's fabulous things flourish. And then the use of digital world and the use of like physical world, and somewhere in there, this idea about proximity. So it began with, why would anybody get on a plane and travel to Dublin for a conference? And then it became, what if we make a small event where people get together, but what if we make lots of them? So this morning I was talking with people in Botswana and in Egypt and in India and in Australia, who are all taking the recipe that we've written, and they're making their own, they're cooking up their own stew, and very much looking forward to seeing what grows out of that.
Sounds awesome. There's so much in there, Dominic. I should have had a piece of paper and pen dotting it all down. I think one thing that you talked about that really resonates with me is the kind of top down, bottom up. And people so often leave out the middle out. And often the middle out has just as much power as the top down and the bottom up level of things. And that kind of I'm not sure what you said around the population or the dissemination, or trying to get away from that scalability idea of using the kind of same template in every place will be able to adopt it in exactly the same way. I mean, that's the utopia, isn't it? Thinking that you could just do something once, produce the toolkit, and then the entire world could just adopt it as is. Just unrealistic. It's not as straightforward as that. I do think there are, I love your recipe idea. And what were just to go back to the three things that you said were in so there's nothing about us without us.
Yeah, so this is specifically for Creative Brain Week, which is this gathering of artists and scientists, and they're artists and scientists who are thinking about equity and fairness.
Yeah.
And they're a particular kind of scientists, they're neuroscientists, and they are a particular kind of neuroscientists because they're interested in neurodegeneration, but also flourishing. So they began as people looking at Alzheimer's and dementia. And then very quickly, as they brought people from all around the planet, they realised that Alzheimer's and dementia is connected to the environment in which you live and how much stress your body's under, to be very simple about it. You know, the things that happen to your body trigger your biology to do things. There are lots of other reasons and ways of looking at it, but that's an element. And so, and they also realized that people got very animated about this idea of patient noise. So not being patient, it's such a great word, not being patient with the system, that actually you could stand up and go, that's not what I want. You know, I know I'm dying, and actually I want to go eat ice cream because ice cream makes me happy, or I want to go and look at Rembrandt. Can somebody help me do that even though I can't move? So the voices of those people have to be part of the room, alongside the learned intelligence and various types of cultural issue and mobility, all sorts of stuff. So that led to thinking about, how do you make those rooms? How do you make everybody feel that they belong in that room, and that they're welcomed in that room, and that they can be balanced in that room, or they can unbalance themselves, they can take an adventure, they can risk something. So that led to each one teach one, because it's where does it go? No show without a tell, no tell without a show, and nothing about us without us. And there might be some more, we might grow other ones, but I want to stick to 3 at the moment, because I think, you know when you cook and you put in too many ingredients and it just tastes like beige. You need to kind of balance the flavors.
I absolutely love the what was the second one again? I don't want to misrepresent what you just said. Is it
no show without a tell, no tell without a show?
Yeah, I absolutely love that, because for years people have always sort of talked about me as though I'm an interpreter, between the different sectors. I just don't think we need one interpreter in the room. He's got an idea of what everyone else is talking about and trying to sort of present it in a way that everyone can understand. And I know that there's so many interpreters out there kind of trying to do that cross-sector partnership working and enable everyone to hear and see what each other's got to say. But that concept of them being the interpreter themselves rather than relying on somebody else to do that for them is really interesting.
Yeah, that's maybe one of the things about radical creativity and radical old age, is stop thinking in terms of us and them. And so I'm looking at, I've had lots of different jobs. In retrospect, it doesn't often feel like it, but I have worked in rooms with people who are maybe there because they have an Alzheimer's disease that has developed to the point where they're not able to look after themselves. And I know that if I'm working with one person, quite often there's a kind of chain reaction in the room. Or if one person's off, there will definitely be a chain reaction in the room. I think that's exactly the same for so-called neuronormative people. It's the same. It's definitely the same with theatre audiences. You can measure theatre audiences watching a show and their heartbeats synchronize, and the technology suggests that their brain waves synchronize. So actually, one of the great joys of making stuff is for that. It's for tuning in or tuning out.
And I think that's the perfect way to end this, Dominic, is to say that radical is about making your heart beat faster. Whatever that might be.
Yeah.
I think that's lovely. I'm going to take that, if you don't mind. I'm going to steal that.
Don't mind. That's partly what I'm here for, is to just suggest things and see where they go. And it is the great fun of what I do, really, is seeding ideas and watching them walk for themselves.
It's been fascinating, thank you. And I am going to come back to you on a couple of those other things that have got my mind pricked, thinking about, just the future, particularly around co-design, co-creation, cross-sector working, all that kind of stuff that I know that you've been really challenging yourself and others to think deeply about. So yes, more talks to come. But thank you so much for your time today. Hugely appreciate it. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.